So, our topic is deepening your spiritual influence. Not widening your influence, although it may involve that, but because spiritual dynamics, spiritual power, spiritual truth has the potential to go deep into people's experience, that's what spiritual influence has to offer. Time magazine asks every year of its readership, who is the most influential person in the world today? And their editors gather together all of the suggestions, and they go through the list. And Time always prints an issue in which they talk about the 100 most influential people in the world. Just a couple of weeks ago, their issue came out. And as I read through the list, I noticed one thing, and that is that 2/3 of the names on the list I didn't recognize, which may say something about me and my limited knowledge, but it may also indicate this, that you don't need to be famous to be influential. As a matter of fact, the most significant part of influence is that it takes place most profoundly in a hidden place, in the underlying dynamics of life. When Time magazine had that issue at the turn of the century, they said, let's not just print an issue in which we talk about the 100 most influential people this year, or the most influential person of the previous year. What about the most influential person of the century? And their board gathered their information and all of the opinions, and they settled on a German-born Jewish physicist whom you may have heard of, Albert Einstein. Why did they, which is just an opinion, why did they settle on the opinion of Albert Einstein being the most influential person of the 20th century? Well, it was because what Einstein did by getting at physics at a very high level, by getting at the hidden forces of the universe, it really changed the modern world. Today there is nuclear medicine and nuclear energy and the potential of nuclear conflagration because of Albert Einstein. As a matter of fact, Einstein was a signatory of a letter that went to the President of the United States urging the president to seek the building of an atomic weapon because of the fear of what was going to happen in World War II. And later he wondered, I wonder if we should have done that because we unleashed something of immense power. In his biography of the life of Albert Einstein, Walter Isaacson relates a story in which Einstein said, when I was just a boy, when I was just 5 years old, my uncle showed me a compass. And as I looked at this compass, watching this needle move on its axis in almost a magical way, that was when I realized something hidden had to be behind all things. And that really set Einstein on a lifelong journey to understand the relationship between matter and energy, the hidden and the visible. And he had something there. You and I are going to talk tonight about spiritual influence and the things that are hidden, things like ideas and ideals and the truth of God. These things are immensely powerful. They create influence that is not just causing people to do things, not just moving bodies around, but really life-changing, transformative power. We know how much we need that today because we live in a world of enormous struggles and problems and challenges. As we are in an election year now in which there's an enormous amount of energy being spent on hiring one guy for one job, I wonder whether the nation is realizing, no matter who it is, no matter when it is, one person can only do one job. If we are going to get through the struggles and the crises of the world today, it's going to require armies of leaders and influencers, multitudes of them. Because when the next natural catastrophe hits, it's going to take a lot of people to deal with it. When the next man-made catastrophe happens, it is going to take large numbers of people to deal with it. When the next natural catastrophe happens, for which we tried to come up with human solutions, as was the case when Hurricane Katrina plowed into Louisiana, and the best thing that the federal bureaucracy could do was to say to thousands of people, why don't you go to the football stadium, when there was no provision for them there. We're clumsy. We're awkward. Matter of fact, I know a pastor from that area, and he tells a story of how it was the churches in that area that were limber enough. They were able to respond quickly and did many, many acts of mercy in the face of Hurricane Katrina. We live in a time in which there are global economic stresses, enormous problems that people don't know the answers to. We also live at a time in which there are crises of trust, when public figures say one thing into the television screen, but you are always wondering, does it match what they really think? Is there any authenticity there? Is there any truthfulness there? Is there any integrity there? And so a crisis of leadership in our society. We're talking about influence tonight, interchangeably with leadership, because one of the things that I have learned in talking to a lot of younger leaders is that they don't need the title leader. They may not have a business card, they may not have a title on the door, but they know that they're in a place of influence, and they have taught me, let's broaden out the discussion of leadership to include anybody and everybody that is in a place of influence. So if you're here tonight and you have an interest in doing your management job better, or you work in healthcare, or you're a teacher and you want to be more spiritually influential, or if you're a mom or a dad or a neighbor or a Sunday school teacher, it's all about the same thing. People are looking for something higher, and they know that human leaders aren't going to be able to do it all. People know that they need something higher. People know that they need something rooted in their God. I have a theory, and that is that if you have any kind of leadership responsibility, here's the secret: nobody really wants to follow you. They really don't. They don't care about that. They want to know that if they do follow you, that you are leading them to something higher, something more altruistic, some principle that they can be proud of. We'll cover 4 points tonight. First of all, getting grounded. You can't talk about spiritual influence without getting yourself rooted in the source of spiritual power. And then taking initiative. Influence is an active thing. It takes faith and moving out. And then going deep. This is something I feel very strongly about. If you have a relationship with God, you have something available that is deep, like wisdom that you can offer to other people. And then we'll look at facing challenges. Because if you are trying to be influential in other people's lives, you're kind of tampering a little bit, even if they invite you in. And it will draw a little bit of fire, a little bit of criticism. You'll be disappointed in yourself. You'll be disappointed in others. The challenges abound. If there's one main point I want to get across tonight, it's this: you can have an enduring influence if you draw upon the powerful spiritual values, character, and abilities you have as a believer. We're going to talk tonight about enduring influence. Influence in terms of just getting somebody to do something tomorrow. That may be what your job or your responsibility is. But I know that all of us want to, at the end of our lives, say, I was able to be influential to the glory of God in some enduring way, in a meaningful way, in a purposeful way in the lives of other people. So I did a survey of 1,000 people asking them this question: who has been the most spiritually influential person in your life? And we gave them a number of possibilities. 14% said their mother, 5% their father. Fathers have a little catching up to do, a lot of catching up there to do. Another family member, 9%, a friend, 17%, a pastor, 30%, an author, 6%. I don't know who others are, cats or dogs or something else. But here's what I notice about this, and I've asked this question of groups of people for a very, very long time. First of all, most people don't have a hard time thinking of somebody. And secondly, it's almost always somebody that they know. Why is that? It's not that Billy Graham was not influential for half a century. It's not that C.S. Lewis's writings are not influential, but the most influential people that we generally think of are influential because they have a proximity to us. They poured something directly into us. It's the difference between taking a bucket of water and throwing it out at a crowd of people and taking one vessel and carefully pouring water into it. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind with influence. Probably your greatest influence is going to be with people who know you personally. Maybe it's somebody that you work with. Maybe it's somebody in your family. Maybe it's somebody that you're trying to disciple. But those are the people that you are going to have the greatest influence on, which makes me think I've got to open up my eyes to this sphere of influence that I have of the people immediately around me. Because I can think about people at a far distance. I can think about helping people in Africa or Asia. But my greatest influence is likely to be with the people who are in proximity to me. We also asked those 1,000 people this question: what experiences have been most deeply influential in your life? And they could answer a multiple of answers. A lot of people said worship, prayer, a crisis I had to go through, a small group I was a part of, Bible reading. But isn't it interesting that the thing that more people responded to than anything else in terms of the experience most influential in their lives is crisis? Again, I've heard that from groups of people over the years in many, many different places. Why is that? Why is it that something as unwelcome as crisis, something as seemingly destructive as crisis, oftentimes will be the real growth points in our life? Is it as simple as this, that sometimes our lives need to come apart a bit so that with God's help we can put them back together? So does that mean that we should create influence in other people's lives by precipitating as many crises as we can for them? No, not exactly, but I do think this. It means that one of the greatest opportunities that we have for spiritual influence is to be ready. To be ready when that person that you work with finds out that her mother has cancer. When that person in your family or in your church who loses their job. Because if you say, it's not the big plans that I have all the time that are going to be my greatest influence. It's not my programs. It's not the things that I create necessarily. It is my responsiveness to be an agent of love and truth on behalf of God in the name of Christ when crisis happens, especially to the people in the immediate proximity. And I have a feeling that at the end of our lives, when all of our lives are assessed, we're going to feel as though those were the moments that were the most important, when we were able to, by faith, be a source of compassion, support, or truth to somebody going through crisis. Deepening your spiritual influence has to begin with getting grounded in your spiritual life. We need to define our terms, first of all. Why are we even using the word influence? Well, influence is a synonym for leadership. It's been used that way for a number of decades. And I have found that a lot of people, especially younger people, are saying, don't just talk about leadership because, for one thing, we are tired of top-down, heavy control, hierarchical leadership because we don't believe that that's always the way to get things done. Frequently, it's the way to not get things done. We also aren't terribly concerned whether we have a title or not. We are concerned to see a dynamic thing unfold, a community thing unfold. The word influence in the dictionary is defined, first of all, most simply as having an effect on someone or something else. So yeah, you're being influential if you cause something to happen. But if you're interested in spiritual influence, you're not going to be content with that, just causing something to happen. What's the something? What's the purpose and what's the enduring value of your influence. In the dictionary, a secondary definition of influence has to do with underlying, hidden, unforeseen dynamics and forces that exert the greatest influence. I have a feeling that the person that you thought of who was the most spiritually influential person in your life didn't become that person at one moment in time when they did something heroic for you. Most of the time, we're going to be thinking about somebody who, over a long period of time, and through those hidden things like character and values and compassion, had a cumulative influence on you. The word influence comes from the Latin word influentia, which means something that flows in and causes changes. You see the word fluent in influentia. It's something that flows, usually a force that is imperceptible or hidden. And so the word influentia was used in the Middle Ages to describe the influence of the celestial bodies, as a lot of people superstitiously believed that we do what we do because the stars and the other celestial bodies cause us to do it. And there's actually something that is flowing to us, some kind of an energy, some kind of an ether flowing to us that is superstitious, but it's an indication that people have always thought there must be something a little mysterious about why we do what we do. I mean, have you ever looked around as to what people do and say, why do they do that? What is causing them to do that? Could be something heroic, extraordinarily good, or something that is bad, vile. Why do people do what they do? We need to define spiritual because it's a tricky word. I know it's tricky because a lot of people say they're talking to friends and they'll say, well, you are a very spiritual person because you go to church. You actually read the Bible. You're a spiritual person. You know what the appropriate answer to that is? You have never known a human being who is not a spiritual creature. The word spirit in Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek in the New Testament, means wind or breath. Something hidden that is evidence of life, breath, or that is a powerful influence like wind. And so God is described as spirit, invisible, and yet the greatest reality in the universe, and immensely powerful, spiritual. Spiritual is not a vague thing where you just kind of reach out to the universe for a spiritual kind of feeling. In biblical revelation, there is a point in time, it's described in Genesis chapter 1, where the creator of the universe decided to make human beings uniquely in his image. That's what makes you a spiritual being. Man and woman created in the image of God, like God. So God is spirit, and you have a spiritual life, and you have a capability of having a relationship with the Creator God of the universe. That's amazing, and something you do not see anywhere else in the animal kingdom. You will never go downstairs early in the morning and find your cat or dog having a time of devotion. You will never go out in the forest and find the woodland animals had built a shrine in order to satisfy their spiritual urgings. It just doesn't happen because they don't have it. You are created in the image of God, and so you are a rational person because God is a rational God. You have reason, at least on our better days. We have rationality. We have an amazing ability to put things together with these things we call minds. Because you are created in the image of God, you are capable of creativity. Not creativity in the way that God can just make things come into existence. We can't create molecules, but we can take molecules and rearrange them. You could go home tonight and take a piece of paper and design a house that nobody has ever thought of before. Whereas the robins that return to your backyard every spring of the year, they always build their nest in exactly the same way. They don't say to each other, let's make a square this year. let's make a duplex this year. Because they are not capable of anything other than animal instinct. Creativity, spirituality, rationality, and also morality. C.S. Lewis said that the most compelling argument for the existence of God is that human beings have an innate sense of some things are right and other things are wrong, ought and ought not. And Lewis said, how in the world would we as animals get that idea unless there was something that came to us from a higher source? Made in the image of God. All of the Abrahamic faiths, look back to Genesis chapter 1, people all over the world from any culture and any place have this spiritual aspiration to connect with some source. Human beings are irrepressibly spiritual. And so if you have a leadership responsibility, or if you are in a spot of influence, the most profound truth is that you can exercise your influence out of a divine human nexus. Nexus just means connection, a relationship with God, whereby you're receiving from God things like His power and His truth, and even authority. And what you do on behalf of other people is you're simply passing along the attributes that God has passed on to you. I read an article by a pastor the other day, and it said, why I resigned from my church. And I thought, I didn't know that guy resigned. And you go 2 or 3 paragraphs in, and then it becomes apparent he didn't actually resign his job. And what the point of the article is, he said, I got tired of pretending that I was the leader of this church, because God is the only one who can, God is the only one who ought to be the shepherd with a capital S, to lead people into green pastures and quiet waters. So I'm an under-shepherd. I'm a sub-leader. I get to do what God wants to do in people's lives as His instrument and His instrument alone. I love the story in John chapter 7 where Jesus in the city of Jerusalem on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, a feast which included the pouring of water, large quantities of water at the base of the temple. Jesus stood up and He said this, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, streams of living water will flow from within them. You know what that is? That's influence. Jesus saying, receive from me, and then let it flow through you. What do we let flow through us? God gives us these immensely powerful things like ideas and ideals, really good ideas. And when in your place of responsibility, you are a person in a given day that comes up with a really good idea, you know that's a good day. And ideals are ideas that you're willing to sacrifice for. You might even be willing to die for. This is what we get to receive, what we get to pass on, and that's spiritual influence. Discernment and wisdom. We'll spend a few minutes looking at that. Enormously important. And people are longing to find somebody around who gets life. They have a sharp vision, a discernment. And they are able to act out of a deep wisdom. And power, authority, and truth. If you're a leader or in a position of influence, and you want God to be the real influence in people's lives, what you get to say is, I am so glad that I don't need to amass personal power. I am so relieved that I do not need to assert my personal authority. And I'm really glad that I don't need to come up with some home-baked truth, because I'm just the middleman along the way, passing on God's authority and God's power and God's truth. When I've taught on this subject in China, Latin America, elsewhere, where leadership in those societies in the culture is horribly corrupt, hardly anything you can count on. They say, when in the church we imitate the ways of the world, we just import that power mongering and that arbitrary authority and holding on to dogma. And they say, we don't know as believers how to do anything different. Getting grounded